Welcome to the Visibility Project podcast.
Welcome to the Visibility Project podcast.
Welcome to the Visibility Project podcast.
Started by a group of citizens in a small Michigan town with a like-minded goal
of increasing the visibility
of the unseen and unheard populations in our community.
Our guests will share stories and insights
with the goal of increasing our awareness and knowledge
of various aspects of diversity and equity
to create a more connected, empathetic, and inclusive community.
So, let's get to work.
Let's get to work.
So let's get to work.
So let's get to work.
Let's get to work.
Welcome to the Visibility Project podcast. I'm your host, Jeremiah Lee. In today's episode, we will be meeting with two people who were directly impacted by a flood that destroyed the homes and livelihood of the community of Sanford, Michigan and surrounding areas in May 2020. The flood was a result of the collapse of the Edenville and Sanford dams due to catastrophic rainfall. The flood caused over $200 million in damages to 2,500 businesses, with over 10,000 people evacuated. Thankfully, the evacuations prevented any loss of life in the flood, but it forever changed the lives of the small community overnight. Our two guests today will share their personal stories related to this natural disaster and the long-term impacts it has had on them and their families. Vanessa Maxon is originally from Sanford, Michigan, and currently lives in Midland. She spends her time with her two children and previously owned a cleaning company prior to the Sanford flood. She is now the home caretaker as they continue to recover from the flood, which destroyed their home. Christie McDonald was born and raised in Sanford, Michigan, where she lives with her husband, Matt, and 17-year-old son, Owen. She has been employed at Northwood University for the past 19 years and will be the Associate Dean of Student Success starting in June of 2022. Christie owns and operates Creations by Christie, LLC, which started as a small side business to fund her community service efforts after the flood. After the flood, Christie created Home Cooked Tuesday. Christie, along with many volunteers and generous people, fed families impacted by the flood for 22 weeks, serving over 2,500 meals to families. Well, welcome, Christie and Vanessa. I'm so happy that you're here with us on the Visibility Project podcast today to tell us about your experiences. So thanks for being here and welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. As we get started today, I'd like to dig a little bit deeper and get to know you both a little bit better. So, Christie, I'll start with you since we used to work together at Northwood University. But can you talk to our listeners, tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself, your background, and really what are you passionate about? What gets you out of the bed in the morning?
Sure. I grew up in Sanford, Michigan, born and raised. I live in Midland currently. I work at Northwood University. I just took the position of Associate Dean of Student Success. I've worked 19 years in financial aid, so I'm kind of switching over to the other side of the university, which is exciting and scary all in one. I'm finishing up my PhD in higher education leadership, and so I'm doing my dissertation on student success, so it aligns with my new position. My passions are my family. Obviously, I'm married and have a 17-year-old son. And he's very involved in sports, so that keeps me quite busy. We do a lot of projects for veterans in the area, but my true passion is community service. So that's what fuels my fire. If I'm stressed out at work, if I can go help somebody, that actually just balances me where I actually feel more productive and happier in life. So I continue sometimes crazy amount of commitment, but I continue to find needs in the community and give back as much as I can through different projects.
Well, thanks so much, Christie, and congratulations on a new job change. That's exciting, and I think that that's great that you've taking those breaks and giving back to the community. It's really admirable and amazing. So, Vanessa, off to you. Can you tell us a little bit more about your background? What are you passionate about? What gets you out of bed in the morning?
Okay, so I too was born and raised in Sanford, Michigan. I currently do live in Midland. What I was doing for an employment was a cleaning service business. That's kind of went to the wayside since the flood and the pandemic and stuff. What I'm passionate about is my children. I just had my second child. She's 5 months old, and I'm staying home with her right now and spending time with her. And then I like to spend a lot of time outdoors and the environment and stuff, and teaching my children about the environment and how to protect it.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for sharing, Ed. We got the, I know our listeners can't see it, but we can see on video your beautiful daughter. So it's great to meet Anna too. So today we're going to dig deeper into both of your experiences surrounding the flood. And I'd love to hear from both of you about what happened. So could you both maybe walk me through what happened on the day of flood, both of you, and then how did it impact you personally, or how did it impact those your loved ones or those you know? So yeah, walk me through what happened on that day and how were you impacted directly by this? Vanessa, I think I'll start with you on this one.
Okay, so I remember that day very well. It was that May 19th of 2020. We were in the middle of the pandemic. There's a stay-at-home order, and sirens began going off and our phones began going off. I had just made my son lasagna dinner. We were sitting at the table getting ready to eat, and it was like an Amber Alert type thing had went over our phone, and then the sirens in town were going off. And so I got up and I called my mother to see if I was in the way of where the flood was going to be coming from. I thought I should be good and I wouldn't have to worry about it, but she told me that I should probably evacuate. At that point, I had gotten like pictures and different things out from underneath of my bed and just important mementos, and I put them in the car and we went back to eating dinner. And it was about 20 minutes. I had been messaging every one of my friends in Sanford, Edenville area, because they were in the direct line of where everyone was going to get hit. I was making sure that they were getting out of their homes, and my phone rang. And I answered it, and it was one of the firefighters here who works in town. I used to nanny for them for 7 years. And he told me that I needed to get out of my home because they were anticipating that there was going to be 9 foot of water in my house.
Wow.
It was the first home that I had ever purchased. I bought it 5 years prior to the flood. So still had a hefty payment on it. And he told me that I was going to get close to 9 foot. So at that point, I started calling family members, people with trucks, trailers, whatever, and asking them to get here immediately to try to get out my belongings from my house, because I had worked my whole life for the things that were inside of my home. We cleaned out about 60% of the contents of the house at that point. And my son's father was here helping, and he kept like begging me to get going. Can we please go? Can we please go? It's no more stuff, no more stuff. Let's get us out of here. And I was having a really hard time leaving, because I knew when I stood on the street and looked back at my house that was the last time I was going to see my house in the condition that it was in, that we were never going to have our home in the order that it was in ever again. So I had a hard time leaving, but we finally jumped in the car and left when water started bubbling up out of the street. So I decided it was probably time to get going.
Right.
We left, and there was cars everywhere. They were all over. They were down the streets, on the sides of the roads. They were in the parking lots at all of the stores, because nobody really had anywhere to go. We went to my mom's, and we ended up staying there for a little bit before she asked me where my cats were. And I said that they were at home, and that I had put the ladder down in the attic so that they could climb up the ladder. And she said that my cats were going to die. So I came back for my cats, and she told me not to. And I asked her to watch my kid so that I could go back. At that time, I had only had my son. I asked her to watch him so I could go back. And she said, no, I'm not going to watch him. You don't need to go back. So I loaded him up, and I came back for the cats, and I put a life vest on him. And we came down, and by that time, the whole street was flooded with water. It was starting to come up my driveway, and you couldn't get down the road. So I had to run up all of the yards to get up to my house and get my cats out. And I got them out, and we headed back to my mom's. I walked in with the cats, and she told me that I was a crazy person for doing that. But we ended up getting everything out. That was important. And then, we went to bed that night. So that was the day that the flood hit.
Wow. That's like all of that in one day, to be able to just, and then you just have to go to bed that night hoping and waiting for the impact. So was it 9 feet, did you say, like total, or how much did it actually end up flooding the whole total?
So thankfully, we did not get 9 feet in my house. We got 2 foot. I returned back the next day. People were all over social media talking about boating people into their houses or trying to boat them out. And I had gotten a hold of a guy who was willing to boat me into my house, which, mind you, at this point was illegal. They said that we were not to be doing that. But I didn't have my contacts and I couldn't see. And so I met him down here. It took him an hour to get around all the detours, and he come to my house and we boated in, and I put my muck boots on at that point. I was able to get in through the house. There was about 16 inches at that point. And so I was able to walk in through the house. And at that point, the floors were buckling and the hardwood was breaking. And it felt like the house was shifting. When I was walking through the house, I literally thought the house was lifting up off the ground and floating away, is what it felt like, because the boards were lifting up as I was walking. And I kept yelling out to the guy with the boat, is the house moving? Is the house moving? And he's like, no, that the house isn't moving. You're good to go. And I'm like, something's happening. And then the lights were flickering on and off in the house. And this is why we were not supposed to be going inside of our homes and whatnot, because we could get electrocuted. But I had my muck boots on. So, conductor there. And I grabbed a couple of items out of the house and headed back out. And then a couple of hours later, I came back down to look again. And that's when we had the 2 foot. So it came to 2 feet inside of my house before it started receding.
So I gotta ask, like, this is so much to deal with. Like, what were you feeling at the time? Like, how were you feeling? And I guess too, like, how did that change over time?
So I think that I functioned in survival mode for at least a year and a half. I don't think that any of my emotions were really being felt at that time, because it took about a year and a half before I realized that the flood affected me. So during that time, when all of that was going on, I was not really sad or overcome with emotion or upset or anything. I was just like, let me get the things that I need to get and let's get going. And I kept saying, I'm so thankful I got my cats. I'm so thankful I got my kid out. I'm so glad I have my baby books. Like, those were the things that I focused on. And I just was kind of focusing on the next step. Where are my cats going to go? Where are we going to sleep tonight? How are we going to get food? What are we going to eat? So I was more in the moment for at least that first year. Everything I was functioning in was in the current moment.
Gotcha. And let's circle back to that later in our conversation. I want to hear more about like how that, like you said, a year and a half. So I want to find out more about like when those feelings started to change. But I want to hop over to Christie, and thank you so much, Vanessa, for sharing your story. Christie, I want to talk to you now. Same question. So can you walk me through the day the flood happened to you? What happened? How did it impact you personally, or to those you know and love as well?
Sure. So same thing with Vanessa. My parents live right in Sanford, and my sister did as well. And so when they started evacuating, because I lived the furthest out, they all came to my house. I actually had 28 people at my house the evening of the flood. And to be quite honest, I do live on a river, and we weren't sure we were going to be safe there, but we thought it was the safest place we could be. So we all just piled into the house and kind of rode out the night. My sister, who had flooded in the past, so we knew she was kind of really in a major danger zone. My parents are a little bit higher. We were very unsure how they were going to be impacted. But as the night went on, my sister, of course, did not sleep. She was up getting alerts from people, getting alerts from the fire department in Sanford. That next morning, because the roads had all flooded and we were on the opposite side of the river, nobody could get back to Sanford. And so everybody was at my house across the river, not knowing if they had a home or not, or what the impact was going to be. We had a couple sources of people that were inside that was giving some information. My sister received a phone call probably around 10:30 the morning after, so it was on the 20th. And she had somebody that said, I'll meet you at the top of the riverbank and let's see if we can find your house, if it's still there. And so she drove. It took her an hour and a half to get there, just to cover all the detours. She met her friend at the top and they had binoculars, and she called us and said, my house is not there. So her house was completely gone, where there was absolutely nothing left. And so she knew she'd be flooded, obviously, because of where her house was, but she had no idea that her home would not be there. So that was really hard. She came back to the house and basically, what do I do from here? Where do I go? And so we rode out the water until she was able to get back in. She too, like Vanessa, got in a boat with her neighbors and basically just went down there to see if they could find anything. About two days later, when the water receded enough, we did find the second floor of her house about a quarter of a mile from where it sat, and it was actually inside of a pond. And so it had gone over the trees. So if that tells you how big a wall of water came, it actually went over full-grown trees and landed in a pond. And so the second floor was in the pond. The first floor, they figure was blown right out. There was no signs of it. We did find her stairs a little bit further than the second floor of her house. But when it was clear to go in there, because her second floor was sitting there, my husband and my nephews built a bridge to the second floor of her home and to see what was still left in the home. My sister had a cedar chest from my uncle that was killed in a car accident. And she said, I never thought the water would reach the second floor. So she put everything from the first floor on the second floor, thinking that, okay, she'll get flooding on the first floor, but not the second floor. And so they climbed in the windows and her clothes were still hanging in her closet.
Wow.
So it had blown out the first floor. The second floor went over trees and her clothes were still hanging in the closet. She did find the cedar chest. Her jewelry box still had my grandpa's pins that she had received from him when he had passed away. And there was only one item that she truly wanted that she could not find, and it was an antique Mr. and Mrs. Claus that we were given from a family member that we transferred back and forth every year. And it was her year, the year before, that she was supposed to give them to me, and she never did. And I beat myself up every day because I'm like, if I would have just taken them from her, they would have been safe. But we had a wonderful person in Sanford who had a double set that were the exact same Mr. and Mrs. Claus that they gifted my sister. So we do have a Mr. and Mrs. Claus back. Not the same thing, but it's very close, and it meant a lot that they actually gifted them to us. And so my sister left that day with no home. I mean, she did get the things that were important to her. And if you asked her today, she will tell you how grateful she is just for those sentimental things that she was able to recover from the home. In the cedar chest was pictures. And luckily my parents' house was one house away from getting water. They did not get water. I don't know how we would have handled two people with flood damage. So we sat in the front yard of my parents' house and went through all the pictures in the cedar chest and tried to dry them out as best as we could. And my other sister transferred them all on video or a DVD for her so she can have them, so which is really nice. But my sister, it took a long time, I would say, just like Vanessa. She's just now processing it, I would say. Much like Vanessa, she was in survival mode. She kind of pushed her energy into other things. She lived with a ex-boyfriend for a while, and she just rented her own home now in Sanford. So she's back in Sanford. That's where she wants to be. That was, like Vanessa, her first home she ever purchased. And so it's very hard to accept that that house is gone, that there's nothing there. And so she's recovering slowly, but I think it's something just like yesterday, and I couldn't get on Facebook because it's just something I just don't want to relive. And I don't want to see that. So.
Right. I understand. So, well, thank you for sharing. And Christie, I do have to ask too. So you also, beyond just the flood, you, like you said in your introduction, right, you like giving back. So you did some, can you talk us through what did you do and what did your family do? And it sounds like you created some new initiatives to help people in your community. So could you talk me through this a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So directly after the flood, there was, I would say there was a lot of volunteers in the area. People kind of just dropped. Like Vanessa stated, we were in the middle of a stay-at-home order. And if you walked into Sanford or Midland that was affected, you would not know COVID was a thing because there was people mucking houses. There was people driving around grilling hot dogs in the back of cars to give people food so they could survive, so they could go through these 12-hour, 16-hour days. And so a few months after the flood happened, it was kind of obvious that volunteers obviously had to return to their everyday lives, you know, their jobs and stuff like that. And so I was driving to my parents' house in Sanford one time, and I was past about 4 houses, and there was people just mucking, and they were doing work. And I thought, where are they eating? Like, why? They don't have food. And a lot of them would not stop to eat because there was so much to do. So I came to my mom's house and I said, you're going to think I'm crazy, but I am going to cook meals for a family that lived around the corner from them that had 3 girls. And I said, I'm just going to cook 5 meals for them and take them to them. It was a Tuesday evening. This happened to be a Tuesday. And so I said, I'm just going to take them meals. And so I went home and I cooked hamburgers and like a meatloaf type thing. And I took them. We ended up making 20 meals because we had extra. And so my mom and I took the 5 meals to the family. And then we drove around the neighborhood, and people were like coming out of their homes for food. Like they were just looking for food. We were greeted with tears, like tears of thankfulness that they had a meal to eat, that they didn't have to go drive into Midland and get something. And so I said to my mom, I said, there's no way I can stop doing this. There's just no way. I did it with my own funds. And so we started what was called Home Cook Tuesdays. We ran the program for 22 weeks until there was another stay-at-home order. And my parents are a little bit older, so I did not want to put them in risks to deliver meals because of COVID. And so we ran for 22 weeks. We cooked meals for about 70 to 80 people a week. We had 4 delivery drivers that would meet at my parents' house, and we would deliver meals. One week we did all the way into Saginaw County. We went to Midland, we went to Edenville, we went to Sanford, and we went to Beaverton.
Wow.
And so we basically made the meals, we split them up, and then we just delivered them, and we took them to the people's homes. So what we wanted to do was to make sure they didn't have to leave to come get the food. We wanted to make sure they could keep working on their homes and get a warm meal, at least one more meal a week. I know it wasn't all they needed, but if I could make a difference with one meal. We also did a bunch of pop-up meals in Sanford, downtown Sanford. We did about that. We actually did about 2,500 meals total in 22 weeks between the weekly meals and the pop-up meals. And it was funded by donations, but I also, in the side, started making shirts and stickers. And I would make shirts at night, sell the shirts to get the money to make the next week's meal. And so my husband would tell you that I did not sit down. I was going. And so, but I thought every shirt I make, that's another meal. Every shirt I make, that's another meal. And so I just kept going. And so that's how that program kind of came about. We're still doing work today. We've done we did Christmas boxes. We've done gift baskets. We've done Easter egg hunts. We've done Easter baskets. And so we try to at least do a couple events a year, a couple events to keep going throughout the years, just to kind of see those families that we became so close with. My aunt and uncle drove to Beaverton every week, and they picked out paint colors with families. They helped do stuff when they were delivering meals because they needed an extra set of hands. You actually truly get to know these people, and you see them at their worst. And so that was the hardest part, is you see them at their worst, and we celebrated every victory they had throughout the process. If I came to a house and they had drywall, it was like, yes, you have drywall. Or, they might have, something else done in their house. It's like, that was a big deal to them because they're living like Vanessa. When I first met Vanessa, she was in a camper in her backyard. And then, slowly she moved into her house. And it's like, I would go home and say, guess what? Vanessa's in her house. And so stuff like that was so exciting to me because I knew how hard it was for them. Like that, it was hard. I mean, this was the hardest event they'll probably ever go through in their lives. And I think it was just to have that support was really important.
Thank you so much, Christie, and thanks for sharing and for all you have done for the families in this community. And it was out of your own kindness and support for others. So absolutely amazing. I want to continue on this conversation of support a little bit. So Vanessa, I'll ask you, I guess, where did you get support throughout all of this? Where did it come from? And I guess too, what would have been helpful that maybe wasn't there? So I'll start there, I guess.
So the day that when we returned back to our home, I do not think, and recalling all of this, and then when I told you earlier in there that took me about 1.5 years to kind of feel it, recalling all of this is sometimes hard for me. I don't remember all of it. So I have a lot of disassociation and forgetfulness with it. But I believe when we came back to our house, it was almost 2 weeks before we ever left the grounds of our house. So what happened was the first day that we were here, I had immediate family show up. And one of them had worked for a local company here called ServPro. And he immediately told me that I had to get everything wet out of my house in 48 hours, that I had 48 hours to get everything out. So we did not sleep. Like Christie said, we did not eat. We did not stop, and we started cutting walls and ripping floors up and just going to town, hauling bags out, doing all kinds of things. And in that time that we were doing that, it was almost like the community responded immediately, because we did, like I said, we didn't leave our home for weeks. And at that time, volunteers started coming into our lawn from and I can't even remember them. It was churches where they started coming from. Churches were sent in from different states and stuff. And these people started showing up on our lawn, and they had contractor bags, they had cleaning equipment, they had gloves, they had shovels, they had masks, because again, it reminds you, we were in a stay-at-home order. And so for us here at my home, COVID didn't really exist. I never experienced the pandemic year, the first year, because there were so many people here. At one time, a car drove down the street and they had their trunk open and they had a bunch of pizzas, and they said, you know, how many people are inside? And I was like, hold on a second. And I ran in and I counted 82 people were on my property and inside of my home. And like Christie said, there was a girl from a church. She was 14. She was laying all of my pictures out in one of the bedrooms to dry. We had kids as young as 10 years old, and people all the way up into their 60s on my property helping. We got a lot of support from the Islamic Center here in Midland. They did a lot of donations for us. So they were able to give us carpets, flooring, new appliances. We were able to get drywall donations from a local church here, the Vineyard. They give us drywall donations. We were able to get food. Christie started dropping food off to us. So every Tuesday, we looked forward to that. She had a time frame that she would come to our house, and I, for somehow, some way, still had the picnic table out back, and that's where we would sit down and eat, because there was no kitchen, there was no anything anymore, and I did not have a camper yet. So I originally started sleeping in a tent out back, but we hadn't had the camper yet. So when Christie would come on Tuesdays, that's when we would sit down like a family and we would eat our meal at the table there. And we knew that on every Tuesday we were going to sit down and we were going to have dinner family time. And Thursdays, there was another company that had came from Tennessee. I can't remember the name of them, but they brought a food truck up and they would serve every Thursday. So Thursdays I would go pick that up. There was someone local giving away a meal every evening, and sometimes I would track those down and find those. So in the middle of the night, when everyone was gone and all of the help was not here, I would get onto social media and I would look for resources. I would look for things that were going on and what I was going to plan out my next day. That's how I found the drywall. That was how I found the food sources and stuff. And then also people would drive up and down the streets and they would have cartons of water, trunks full of alcohol. A lot of times they would throw Bud Lights at you. It was just a bunch of stuff going on. Sometimes they would come through in the when it started warming up, and they would have water guns and stuff, just like things to cool us down. Vehicles drove through with fans that they had picked up from their own money. They would go to Lowe's and buy fans, box fans and stuff, and we would set the house up with those. We had a lot of support from the churches, the community, the neighbors. The neighbors would walk up and down the road and check on each other. Do you need anything? Can we help you get anything out? We went to our neighbor's house at the end of the street, and pulled her cedar chest out of her basement because her basement was full with water, clear up to this 7-foot guy walked down there. It was clear up to his chest area, and he pulled her cedar chest out and brought it out because it had her grandfather's military uniform and stuff in it that she wanted. So he pulled that out, and we just all kind of supported each other. So like I said, during that time, it wasn't like COVID existed because everyone was everywhere. They were always helping. There was always somewhere that we turned, and we ended up with the camper. 2 streets above us did not get wet, and they were driving through and they were looking at everybody to see who they could help or what they could do, and they seen us sleeping in tents, and so they brought their camper down and they parked it in my driveway, and they let us live in it for several months, so that we had somewhere to be outside of the elements, the weather, and my son had a bathroom to use, and we had a place to take a shower because we didn't have those things. There was nowhere to shower or do any of that stuff. I don't think I took a shower for like the first month.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it's understandable living in a tent in a camper and having to go through this. It sounds like so many people in the community stepped up, and outside of the community, people from Tennessee all over have really stepped out to help. So that's really encouraging. I guess both of you, what surprised you during this ordeal? Like, are there things that surprised you after the fact? The support from the community, or like maybe things that where you expected to receive support from, you didn't, or what surprised you throughout this, I guess?
I would say the good support or good surprise would be the school district, Meridian School District. My son he's a freshman then, and they literally, at the stay-at-home order, they were supposed to be working on their online school, and the school sent out a message and said, "We believe that community service is way more important than anything you would learn on the computer." And so they encouraged all the students to get out and volunteer. And so for weeks on end, the kids were actually out. The football team drove around, and I bet you they probably cleared a good 20 houses with just the football team, lifting heavy things out for people that couldn't get them out. And so I think that was something that just kind of validated what a good community we live in, that everybody kind of supported each other. And it was something like you'd never seen before if you lived in it. And I think that people from outside said, "I've never seen a community unite like this community did." It was just unheard of. The schools had supplies, just crazy amount of supplies that were just driving through, and there was constantly volunteers working it. It was just amazing. It was amazing to see. I think we're very, very fortunate to live where we do.
I was taken aback by driving through some of the streets in some local neighborhoods that were really impacted. One of my friends who's on our kickball team, and her partner, we went to their, like, the whole team came and took out their things and were gutting their basement and things like this. And the same thing, like the same stories you're telling, every house where people, like, just, it was piles and mountains of things on the street from their basements. And it was just the amount of support that needed to be shown, and the people that did step up was amazing. But so I would like to transition slightly and talk about, it's been 2 years. So it's been over 2 years. Like, we're recording on May 20th today, and yesterday, as you mentioned, was the 2-year anniversary of the flood. So many people have gone on with their normal lives since then. But clearly, there's a lot that you both are still dealing with. So I guess my question is, are there some things that you all are still dealing with that you wish others understood? I'll start with that. Are there things that you think you'd like others to understand that you're still dealing with as others have moved on with their daily lives?
I think for a lot of people, it's very hard for them to grasp or wrap their heads around like having their home destroyed, and because a lot of people that I talked to during the pandemic, it was a relaxing time for them. They got time with their families. They had awarenesses of how they were investing too much time into work, and they weren't spending enough time with their children, and they look back and they reflect on it as being like a positive time. And I think so many of those people don't understand that for us, like, we were literally without a toilet or a shower or a way to brush our teeth. And it's hard for people to understand the fact that like my retirement is gone and I'm not going to get that back. I'm not going to be able to rebuild that back and get that back at my age. I'm nearing 40. So it's not something that I'm going to be able to rebuild as quickly as I was able to and have that back. So there's a lot of uncertainty in my life now. And I think that's hard for a lot of people to understand. As well as like I struggle a lot with survivor's guilt because of how much community support I was able to get and help I was able to get, where there were people who like the more elderly people, they were unable to access a lot of those things because I was finding them on the internet. I was finding them on social media groups. I was more aware of the programs and the things available, whereas I felt I got all of the support and the help that I needed, and we were able to recover quickly. There are people who are still not in their homes and still don't have places to live. Or I just heard of a friend of mine out in Sanford. I made friends with him through this process and the events that were hosted. I met him there. He just got back into his home a couple of months ago, and we've been back in our home for a year. And to me, it feels like this flood happened 3 or 4 years ago. It doesn't feel like it was just only 2 years. And we've come leaps and bounds since then because I was able to access that community support and those programs and the things available.
Yeah, I would say the financial piece of it is definitely something that I don't think people understood. People talked a lot about FEMA and, oh, you're getting FEMA money. Well, to put it into perspective, I mean, some of the families that I delivered to every week, just for example, one family that I drove across town to the campground because him and his wife were living in the campground. They had bought a house on Sanford Lake. There was about a $300,000 house. It was paid for, completely no debt on the home. They lost the house completely. It was torn down. I mean, because it was not livable, they could not recover it. They received $35,000 from FEMA to rebuild their home. Well, we know during this time, prices were skyrocketing. Things were short. There were shortages everywhere. They took the $35,000 and cashed in all of their retirement to purchase a home to live in. They are in their late 60s. They will never, ever have a retirement like they planned on when they were younger. And like Vanessa, the same thing, her retirement's gone. I mean, we don't have the time to rebuild those funds back up, but they had to use them to get back into a home. They're living in a house that's half the price of what they would have paid for it, what their house was worth, but that's all the money they had. And so people made comments. I heard people making comments about families like, oh, they're getting FEMA money. You have no idea that nobody can rebuild a house or redo a house on $35,000. And that was the most that they could get. And so it's like, they did not get money. They did not make money. They reinvested their own money to get where they're at today. So I think people don't really understand the long-term effects that's happening to these families, that they just will never have what they had before because it was survival. They had to do it.
I think Christie makes a really valid point there, because a lot of people were telling me that, well, FEMA's got you taken care of and your insurance has you taken care of. And my insurance company gave me $500 for the contents of the fridge. And FEMA gave me $6,000 for my house, which I added everything up from what I spent was $87,000, and from what was donated. And I added like material cost, and what everything would have been was $30,000 there. And so these places that were supposed to support us and be there for us and help bail us out of something like this, it barely even covered hardwood flooring in the house.
Incredible. So not only is there the like financial loss, like the long-term financial loss, but and the recovery and the time and everything that takes to get back into this. But I also think that long-term trauma or scars can come in many different ways, whether that's like violence or neglect or natural disasters in this case, and everything in between. So I gotta ask, do you feel like this disaster has impacted you in such a way? Like, for example, are there certain behaviors that you've changed since the flood? I know that you both have said, like, and even it's been 2 years, so it's hard to watch the news about it. Or can you talk me through has this impacted you in a way that you feel is going to stick with you for a while? Or do you approach things differently now, or do you avoid certain places or situations, or do you revisit in your head? Like what goes through it? Does this impact you like in that way that's a really long term, or is it something you're just processing still? I guess I'll stop there and get your thoughts.
So for me in the beginning, I had a lot of insomnia issues. I cried a lot because I had a lot of survivor's guilt. So that definitely impacted me in that way. Forget what else I was going to say. That's another thing that happens is I forget things a lot very easily now. So recollecting memories is very hard for me, or completing thoughts are very hard for me. Because I think that my mind is still trying to process and work out and come out of that survivor mode and realize that we're safe and things are fine, and go into that recovery mode. And I think as I do that, like my brain doesn't process it as quickly, and I have like these lapses in being able to communicate effectively, or articulate what I'm trying to say effectively. In those situations, especially when I put on spot on questions about things like pertaining with the flood, because a lot of people are interested. They want to see the inside of my home. They want to see what happened. And as I'm trying to explain those things to them, it's almost like I hit a wall and I'm stumped and I can't remember. And I feel like that's partially my mind trying to protect me from some of those things that we experienced during that time.
Yeah, I think to watch my sister with water, like if it rains a lot, the amount of anxiety she gets just from rain. I know that sounds crazy, but I mean, she lives in a place that the house she's renting now flooded. So I think she still has that connection of like, probably like Vanessa does, that will it happen again? And if it does happen again, like we can't relive this again, like it's just not possible. So to watch her get super anxiety, like bad anxiety, or for example, if you get a weather alert on your phone and it dings, or an Amber Alert, is like, that's traumatic. Like, I don't know what it is, but that notification is like, a lot of people that I've met that had flood damage have that, it's a trigger. It's a trigger for them, because it's basically like feeling like you're reliving it, even though it has nothing to do with what happened. But it's just like, that was a sequence of events. And so it kind of brings that back to the surface.
I remember one of the things I wanted to say is I don't create long-term goals anymore. And that was something that was huge for me. I was a long-term goal type of person. I thought about retiring. I thought about what I wanted to do when I retired. When I purchased an item, I would purchase it with the intent of how long I could use it for, or what it would be for, or its purpose. I don't long-term plan anymore. I think about the week, and I don't really plan outside of that. My items, I don't worry about them or take care of them as carefully as I did, because I just feel like everything is very subject to change in a matter of a day. Like it's planning to me is something that's very hard.
Well, your whole world changed in a day, right? So it's certainly understandable. And I can only imagine, like, the feelings that you've had throughout that, and how those have continued, and how you continue to process them. So I just, like, on that note too, I want to thank you both for taking the courage to be here with us today and talk about this, because I know it's not easy. So thank you both. As we start to wrap up today, I want to ask a few things about, what do you think could have helped? What do you think can help you now, or can help the community, or help those still struggling? What do you think? It's been 2 years, but what can be done now? What do you think was needed still? What support do you think would be beneficial to those who are still struggling?
Honestly, I feel like a lot of us are still rebuilding. And that's the area that's been hard for me, is finishing up the rebuilding process, because we don't have baseboards, we don't have window frames, we don't have tack strips on the floor. I have a little baby where some of these things are not safe to not have baseboards. When she starts crawling, she can stick her little fingers in there and she can get hurt. In the not tack strips, she can stick her fingers down in there. So there's still things where rebuilding is very important, but that's definitely slowed down. And for most people that the flood didn't happen to, it's over. It's not existent anymore. And there are still very much people who don't have their homes or are still working on their homes.
Great, thank you. And I guess last couple questions. What have you learned through this ordeal, this terrible experience that you've unfortunately had to live through? Are there things that you've learned throughout this experience?
I would have to say what we learned through this experience is that people are what's important, not things, not structures, not belongings, but your relationships with people. Because those are the memories and the things that don't fade and the things that last. So that's what I've really taken from it is we invest our time more in building memories with the people that we love and cherish than spending time building a life around us, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. Thanks for sharing. So last question today. What would be your final message to our listeners?
Mine would be don't take anything for granted and don't ever underestimate Mother Nature.
For sure. True story. Well, thank you both for being here today, sharing your story, sharing your experiences. I know it wasn't easy. It's been 2 years, but I appreciate you both being here to share your stories and your experiences and your feelings throughout that. So, and I hope that this is a catalyst for us to, like you said, Christie, to find ways to support more people and be kinder to others and to be able to step up when people need that support, as you've done, Christie, and Vanessa, as you've seen this support throughout the community. So thanks for being here today, both of you.
You can stay connected with the Visibility Project by subscribing, liking, and sharing on your favorite podcasting and social apps. Look for us at the Visibility PRJ.
Financial support is needed to keep the conversation going. Go to midlandfoundation.org/give and select the Cultural Awareness Coalition Endowment Fund to be part of the project. Note podcast in your donation notes.
Thank you for listening.
We see you.
We hear you.
And together, we are making a difference.